This painting is done for Dinovember, and it is a pack of raptors with 3 raptors total, 2 running and 1 jumping on unseen prey off canvas. However, I didn't like the initial sketch, so I redid the jumping raptor. After trying to rearrange the 2 running raptors, I ended up deleting them, you'll see in a second, and instead drawing 1 better running raptor instead. I did additional research in order to get this a little more accurate, and I made sure to have them in different poses. I was also considering the outline and silhouette of the forms to be more pleasing to the eye. In order to do a better job, I went and did research about Velociraptor's natural habitat. It turns out the plants of ancient Mongolia were not well studied at all, and only recent studies revealed an interesting truth. It seems that ancient Mongolia was more like the Okavango Delta in Africa. The area had a very wet season and a very dry season, making it a desert in the dry season and more of a lush savanna area during the wet season. I researched the different types of plants that live there. There have been a few new discoveries, but sadly there was only reference of the fossils and no reconstruction because they were so recently discovered. So rather, I went mostly with various cycads, and that there was ancient sequoia relatives, as well as succulents, ferns, and horsetails. And I based the plants I was doing here on those. So this is done in Procreate, and it's important to note that you can use different layers to your advantage. So the raptor sketches are on their own layer, the background sketches are on their own layer, the farthest background has its own layer, which is then alpha locked, and behind that is actually the sky layer. That way you can rearrange it in a different canvas configuration later if you save the separate parts, as well as to be able to rework parts of the painting without reworking the entire thing. It also makes certain techniques easier, such as by using the alpha lock in order to only paint over areas you've already painted and using flats. So I did that with the raptors. I used the selection tool to select the shape and then filled it in a solid color, and that way I can alpha lock and paint only where the raptor actually is. On top of that, I ended up doing layers where I painted on top of that. So there's also multiply layers, which darken and desaturate the color slightly, so it's easier to do shadows and darker details using a multiply layer. I mostly use the basic painting brush in Procreate for most of the things in this, but I did also use a bunch of specialty brushes to help out. When it comes to doing some of the details in the bark in the cycads, I used a skin texture brush I got from the free Procreate brushes that you can get. And I also used some free grain brushes to get the sand to have the sand grain in it. And I used a brush called Oil Sculptor I got as a free download to help paint the areas of the raptors that were more feathered. And I used the lizard scale brush to get some details on their faces later. But most of the rest of the painting was done with the regular paintbrush. Velociraptor's name meant swift seizer or swift robber in Latin. A dromaeosaurid theropod dinosaur that lived around 71 to 75 million years ago, which was the late Cretaceous period. 2 species are recognized right now, though there used to be more recognized species. Mostly discovered in Mongolia and China, it was a bipedal feathered carnivore that was among the smallest of the dromaeosaurids. They had sickle-shaped claws on their feet, which did not walk on the ground but instead were raised up to be kept sharp. They used this to disembowel and slash huge rents into prey, which allowed them to hunt prey larger than themselves, although they primarily probably preyed on prey smaller than themselves. It's also theorized they hunted in packs due to various evidence of related species, especially the evidence from Dromaeosaurus and Deinonychus. They had a long tail with stiffening rods in it that was used as a counterbalance, but there's recent evidence showing that it could have bent side to side a bit better than previously theorized. A fast sprinter, this theropod also was very good at jumping and probably was good at climbing trees based on the anatomy of its form. Also commonly just called raptor, they were small 2.07 meter or 6.8 foot long predators that were 0.5 meters or 1.6 feet high at the hip. They weighed around 15 kilograms or 33 pounds and were probably more close to the size of a turkey than anything. The raptor seen in the Jurassic Park films was not actually a velociraptor, but was instead based on the much larger raptor called Deinonychus. Certainly they were active hunters, including of one prey animal called Protoceratops, due to an interesting fossil found where they were locked in a death grip when they were buried over by a sand dune and perfectly preserved. The recent discovery of quill knobs on the arm of a Velociraptor shows that they had fully feathered bird-like wings. Due to the length of the arms, they would not have been flighted animals, but would have had wings, which would have been for display. Possibly also to help them move a little faster when going uphill or in a couple other scenarios. The thing is, this means that they probably had an ancestor that could fly, and other evidence of flighted raptors, including Microraptor guai, prove that before Velociraptor, their ancestors actually flew. The more these creatures are studied and understood, and the more interesting fossil discoveries are made, the more they just appear to be extremely similar to birds. A little bit deadlier perhaps due to their sickle claws and large clawed hands. Their counterbalancing tail makes them look a little bit different than a modern bird, but in general, they are basically birds. And here I'm going over and doing the final details, the darkest shadows and the brightest highlights, making sure everything has the rim lighting and the correct lighting in the situation. A lot of feathers on modern birds look like they have white outlines, just as the way the feather structure is. And I based the coloration on these Velociraptors more on a barn owl, because that's a realistic potential coloration due to the sandy color of the habitat and the fact that they were predators and would want it to have been camouflaged so their prey wouldn't spot them so easily. Another thing I did is have a layer that was almost on top of all the other layers. With a big soft airbrush and yellow color, I made a gradient that adjusted the lighting of the entire picture to look like it was in the same lighting scenario, so lit by a bright sunlight. Over that, I did a final layer for the darkest shadows that would have been affected by this yellow light negatively in my opinion. And I also added a layer that had sand effects. And there you go. That was my Velociraptor pack painting. I hope you enjoyed this short but sweet YouTube video, and sorry that it was late by a day, but I took a bit longer to do a proper job with the research and the details, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Questions and comments welcome. Have a great day. Bye!